Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for fantastic sessions this morning. And I know that the entrees are just coming out, but we have such a great luncheon program that we have to interrupt you and begin. This whole week we've been looking at key issues in energy security and sustainability, critical minerals and food security, and in every single panel, permitting has come up. So this luncheon is about re-engineering the permitting system. And we're really fortunate today to have Alex Hergod, who's the president of the Permitting Institute in Washington, D.C. He flew all the way out from Washington, and this is his third Penware Summit. So he actually knows what we do here, and he's been involved in permit reform and permit re-engineering with states for many years. We also have Stuart Muir, the Chief Executive Officer of Resource Works out of Victoria, BC. And I'd like to invite them to come up on stage and introduce again Bruce Agnew as the moderator of this great panel. So thank you, and I apologize for interrupting you again, but this may be the last time. All right, let's have a big hand for the panel.
I had to grab Alex and Stuart and hustle them over the table so they at least get their salad in them before they came up here. Well, is there an issue, a public policy issue today that's more important than permit reform and modernization? This is going to be a fantastic panel. This is an issue that affects the clean energy projects, transportation, a whole host of opportunities to coordinate, integrate permits at the federal, state, local level. And we do this by stating upfront and clearly, we are not talking about changing the substance of environmental protections that we hold so dear to both countries. We are simply talking about taking a look at streamlining the permit process, because if we are going to, in fact, decarbonize transportation, we have to get these projects online sooner rather than later. So I'm going to turn it over first to Alex, who he will tell you his background because it's very deep and very rich. But we got to know Alex a couple of years ago. We invited him to Calgary, and he and Shant Boyajian were members of the Senate. Was it Commerce or Environment Public Works that wrote Fast 50?
Environment Public Works.
Environment Public Works, which is a committee of jurisdiction in our U.S. Senate that drafts our transportation plan. And so they really set the framework back in 2015 for transportation policy. And so then when the IIJA or the IIJA, I always call it that, the bipartisan infrastructure law, it's also referred to, came along, they had an excellent foundation in terms of multimodal funding, public-private partnerships. One of the things that has been consistently moving through iterations of our federal transportation policy is bipartisan support for permit reform. Great intentions, a little weak on the execution. And Alex is going to kind of highlight that history and give us some specific recommendations what you all can do to improve the permit process. Do you want to do it from there? Or
yeah, I'll do it from the podium. We'll do it from the podium. All right. We're talking about permitting, which many people don't think is very exciting, but I'm going to make it probably one of the more exciting things that that you've ever heard before. You'll be shouting permitting reform from the mountaintops. But by way of background, I spent 15 years in the United States Senate. For those that are familiar with the Safety Lou Transportation Bill in 2005, the Water Resource Development Act bills, Economic Development Authorization grants, anything coming from the Corps of Engineers, the Fish and Wildlife Service, pretty much any federal gatekeeper that has to both create a grant or actually give you permission to move forward on a project is what I worked on for about 15, 16 years in the Senate. And then I went over to run the infrastructure office for whoever the last president was at the White House for 4 years, before then running something called the Federal Permitting Improvement Steering Council, which managed about $400 or $500 billion worth of large-scale project, Boardman Hemingway, Midas Stibnite mine. I know you heard from now it's Laurel's got a different name for it, but much of it is recognizing that projects can move faster, and it's a canard that faster means less protections for the environment. Now, I like to really start off with one question. How many of you know what the unit of measure is for electricity that you pay for when you turn on the lights? All right. How many of you know what the unit of measure is for natural gas that either heats your home or is electrified that turns into electricity that you also use? Right? All right, that's more than most of the staffers in the Senate and the House. So really what we're talking about before I get into it is just to take a step back and realize that infrastructure for everyone else has always been a public good. People need it, but they don't realize how it got there. They don't know what it costs. And because oftentimes the benefits and the costs are spread around so many users, it's really hard to figure out why a project is taking so long or why it costs so much. But we're going to talk about that today because we really have an opportunity now that hasn't existed in about 4 or 5 decades, where the definitions of success for those in the environmental and renewable energy space and those in the conventional energy, water, and critical mineral space are linked, and they are identical now. This is not a Republican-Democrat issue. This is not a campaign issue anymore. It's a pure process reform issue, and if we can't get out of our own way, then what are we doing here? Permitting chaos. Too many decision makers spread across too many federal agencies, up to 13 federal agencies, many times 6 or 7 state decision makers on one single project that are still using a legacy paper-based system that isn't coordinated, where certain times emails, if the megabytes are too high, are getting caught in email boxes for projects over $3 or $4 billion. We're supposed to be one of the most evolved, technically adaptive countries in the world, and we're still sending faxes on big-time permitting documents. One of the things that I want to bring to your attention, because it's important, is that everyone oftentimes points to the federal government and say, if just President Obama or President Trump or Biden or the head of the Corps of Engineers, the Bureau of Energy and Management, or the BLM just got out of our way, then we could fix many of the problems. You're not really supposed to see this big chart over on the left. The whole point of this is to show that on the bottom right-hand corner, those 9 bullet points, those are the federal permits. Everything else on that chart for this long-cell transmission line are state, local, and county authorizations. They make up about 40% of the checkoffs that need to occur for any project over $200 million across all sectors. States have just as much of a role in fixing the permitting process as the feds, and if we fix the federal process and state legislatures in particular are not able to create the reforms of re-engineering the permitting process, then the states that do are the ones that are going to get the new semiconductor facilities, the new hydrogen facilities, and the new generation facilities. And I'll point out some of the states that are the bad actors in a minute, because those citizenry and those taxpayers are going to lose out to the states that are actually more progressive. This is no longer an academic issue of permitting or how long it takes. It's more of the projects that are receiving money today from IIJA or IRA or these big federal bills, even in the best case scenario, will not break ground for 5 to 7 years. That's a reality. Projects have a multi-jurisdictional maze. When I talk about 13 federal agencies, it might be the Corps of Engineers, but you need to check off from the Fish and Wildlife Service. Then the EPA has to give you a water permit. And then you have to figure out whether or not you need a Section 7 waiver because you're impacting the lesser prairie chicken. All of those offices are not based in DC. As many of you know, they're spread across the country in field offices of people that have never met or talked to each other. Too many folks that are disconnected, too many decision makers, and they are not motivated by the operational efficiencies of getting to a decision, not an approval, but a decision faster. They just are more worried about inoculating from risk and making sure that the project doesn't get sued and they get their hand slapped by their direct superior. There's not an experienced permitting officials across the country. We have 900 vacancies for high-level project managers at the Bureau of Land Management. Forest Service, double that. You want to go to the Bureau of Reclamation, double that. Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and the state PUCs, people are not graduating college. They're going to like TikTok Academy. They're not volunteering to go be a biological specialist at the Forest Service to do a biological opinion. We don't have the people. We have the money, but if you look at the vacancies that are on USA Jobs, we just don't have effective counterparties inside the state and federal agencies that can move some of the most complicated, largest projects in the world through the system. And to put that in perspective, The Keystone Pipeline, which we all have heard about, right? $3.5 billion big project. Everyone fundraised off it. The environmental NGOs went after it. People talked about how it was the most important thing that we could possibly get done over the last 4 or 5 years from an energy independence standpoint. That is dwarfed in comparison to the average size of the projects that are being considered today. On average, the average project size for a new energy, transmission, hydroelectric, and critical minerals project is $2, $3, $4, $5 billion. And we're asking a 34-year-old GS-14 biologist to manage one of the most complicated projects in the history of our country, with a 10,000-page environmental document that doesn't include another 2,000 pages of appendices that you need a PhD to understand. There's no silver bullet legislative fix. We're going to come up with some ideas. We're going to talk about some things that you can do at the state level to speed up the process and reduce the 20 to 30% of overhead cost for every project that is directly attributable to avoidable obstacles and delays. Again, this is not a Republican or a Democrat issue. This is a true process redesign. The average time it takes to build a project, and I will leave these slides behind, but you can just see that the National Environmental Policy Act, which everyone hears about, that is 2 to 9 years. Then there's the Endangered Species Act. That can anywhere between a half a year to 2 years to get a sign off to see if you're impacting a particular species or a plant. Army Corps of Engineers, Section 7 navigation water permit to see if you're going to impact navigable waters of the U.S. or flood control or if there's a water quality issue. All of these permitting decisions, again, are being made in siloed different decision boxes at different field offices that are not coordinated. And so in many cases, if a project gets done in 4 to 5 years, that's exception, not the rule. As many of you know in the infrastructure space, we're always talking about funding. Gas tax, we're talking about additional money for grant authority or regional accelerators or TIFIA or WIFIA or things that come from rural utility service or different sorts of grants that can help shepherd the system. Over the last 3 years, the federal government has authorized more than $5 trillion worth of federal infrastructure money, which is more than the Transcontinental Railroad, the Clay Commission, what we did in the stimulus in 2009, the ARA bill, and anything we did in the New Deal combined, even with the time value of money. The single largest federal investment in infrastructure has just happened, and so we don't have to fight the funding debate anymore. We just got to get out of our own way. There was a debt deal that just happened. I'll just talk about that quite briefly. There was a permitting debt deal that happened, but so we could avoid a government and a debt deal shutdown about a year and a half or a month and a half ago. And I can go into these in more detail, and I can refer back to them with some of the questions. But one of the things about permitting is we create all these new terms like significant nexus or reasonably and foreseeable impacts or to the maximum extent practicable. You know who loves these terms? Attorneys. They love those terms because they're not objective, clear criteria. What is a reasonable and foreseeable impact? That was a change that Congress made a month and a half ago to change what previously was a cumulative impact. Can anyone tell me what the difference is? Because the reality is that is a tort law standard. That's not an environmental standard, but that's the new law of the land. And it's going to take a year and a half for agencies to give guidance out to states and to state legislatures to try and figure out how to adapt. And then there's going to be about 3 to 4 years of lawsuits to try and figure out what they mean. We're going to have courts and judges making science-based decisions rather than scientists and project developers. One of the good things is there's a limitation on alternatives. When you're doing an environmental review project, you've got to sometimes look at as many as 6 to 7 different alternatives, including the no-build alternative. Each one of those alternatives costs about $150,000 to do. Now, how many of you are in the third-party contracting business, an AECOM, a Tetra Tech, a WSP? These guys sometimes like a complicated process, no offense, because in many ways, they are the support system that actually writes these documents and hands them to you as a customer if you're a state, a county, or someone putting capital at risk. There's also a recognition that there's a 2-year timeline on some of these environmental reviews, but timelines and deadlines don't speed up a project. What they end up doing is getting you to a no faster, or there's a bunch of front-end build on the application where your application is not deemed complete when you're applying to the Army Corps of Engineers or the Department of Transportation, because they spend all of this time on the front end making sure that the project is as complete as possible, absent the transparency of actually going through the process so that they can still beat that 2-year timeline. We call that gamesmanship, and that's happening in real time in a very significant way, because at the end of the day, there are human beings making these decisions, not a computer. That map over on the right are all the different decisions that need to be made on the permitting side. All of those decisions are all lightning rods for litigation. Those are the things that we try and speed up. 63 environmental laws, most of which were written before the internet. Rivers and Harbors Act of 1910 still governs a permit. I was on the phone today. The Endangered Species Act, 1970, Clean Water Act, 1975. Most of the laws that still govern infrastructure today, again, invented 40, 50 years before the internet, and we're still using those rules today because Republicans and Democrats don't trust each other. They see ghosts in what both are trying to achieve, and it is very difficult to arrive at compromise, so the status quo prevails. And do you know who gets the brunt end of the stick? The ratepayers, who look at this complicated process and say, gee whiz, I hope the public officials we put in office have our best interest in mind. But because the projects are 5 to 7 and 10 years in investment horizons, the state legislators that are in office, the mayors, the governors today, are going to be retired 5, 6, 7 years from now when the project is actually breaking ground. So it's really hard to get the incentives of why action now saves us millions and billions of dollars 4 to 5 years from now. Why should I care? As I pointed out at the very beginning of this, every one of these sectors, conventional energy, mining, water resource, electricity transmission, broadband, ports and waterways, manufacturing, Clean Water Act, and then all of that's pumps and pipes, the underwater system, and transportation. You can't distinguish between what changes to the laws and regulations that we have to fix one sector over another. They all have the same fate, and right now, they all take 5 to 7 years to build. Unnecessary permitting delays that have nothing to do with environmental protection, protecting First Nations, Indigenous people, environmental justice, community impacts, you name it. We can streamline the system without impacting all of those. And anyone else that says the contrary, I'd like them to come up to the stage and debate them right now. The other thing that doesn't help is the whims of election cycles. What we have right now is everybody that takes over a particular office, as soon as Biden took over, he upended everything that President Trump did. The next president that wins will upend everything their predecessor did. And that regulatory whiplash wreaks havoc on project developers that don't care about politics, they just want to build the project. We have 274 new regulations that have happened in the last 24 months across all agencies on how much water you can use, what is the waste assimilation on giving it into the Snake River, if we're going to have a mining project with a new tailing facility, or like maybe it's a stormwater overflow from a new road or transit project. How can you adequately inoculate from risk in building a project if the rules keep changing? I just go to one of the things that you can do, which is a big deal and why we're traveling around the country, and something that I want to get into in a little bit. You can't control what Senator Crapo or what Senator Murray or other folks, or Senator Merkley rather, a couple others, what's going to happen in DC is going to happen. I'm not asking you to go lobby and say we need a faster process. Everyone agrees on the what. We want a faster process with less obstacles, that is less complicated, so that at the average Joe, so I can explain it to my mother, why a project is taking so long and why we have to go get more tax revenue and get more bonding authority for a 20 to 30% cost escalation for a project that is completely avoidable. States gearing up these state permitting councils, which is an online dashboard, so that the projects are transparent, there's a predictable path. You don't like the project, that's great. Go through regular order, register your comments, and we can adjudicate those in real time. Most of the projects that are moving through the system at the state and federal level, and I'm talking about $4.5 trillion worth of projects split across 800 right now, active projects in the pipeline. Mining, wind, solar, pump storage, port expansion projects, you name it. We have no insight to where they are in the process. There is no central repository. It's all happening in a black box. At the state level, you have a transparent dashboard that shows what projects are moving through the system, and you can actually count on those decisions being made in an appropriate amount of time beyond the next gubernatorial election and the next state house election. I'll get into that in a little bit, but the important thing is we've never had an opportunity like we've had in the last 2 years, 3 years, to make real change. And those that continue to argue legacy talking points, whether it be the Nature Conservancy and the National Resources Defense Council fighting against Idaho Power and NextEra Wind and Solar, talking about how the developers don't have the environmental impacts in mind when they're doing these projects, are scared because in many ways, this machine that we call America actually needs about 50 gigawatts of new electricity in the next 20 years, which is 50 nuke plants. And we just are not going to get there. We don't build the semiconductors and the battery storage facilities that we need. And since 90% of our critical minerals are coming from Indonesia, Malaysia, and China, we have no domestic sourcing for our critical minerals. This isn't a Republican or a Democrat idea. We can build a mine safer than anywhere else in the world. I'm talking about Canada and the US combined, yet we don't. Congress cannot get out of its own way. States is laboratory for change. If you take the leadership role, that's really going to make the difference. So, again, with that, I'll turn it over to Stuart, or back to Bruce.
I've got some slides coming up here. You know, these issues are really the same on the other side of the border as well. We're experiencing them at the same time in some different ways. I think there's a determination to find ways through it, through the legislative systems we have. In Canada, it's a somewhat different picture. There was a new study out this morning from the Public Policy Forum that says we need, in Canada, to double or even triple the amount of electricity infrastructure for the projected targets. How are you going to do that if you cannot permit things? This is the obvious question here. Just a quick word about what I'm doing here. I have attended Penware for over a couple of decades, not everyone, but I've been to so many in different places. It's always been a thing I look forward to because it's where these minds come together in a more relaxed setting, and I've made so many friends here. The ResourceWorks team is here as well because we're going to be hosts in British Columbia, and we're really excited about that next year. A couple of things we do in ResourceWorks. We're an independent not-for-profit. We have, during the COVID years, we did a task force on, we called it Real Jobs, Real Recovery, what was needed to come out of COVID. This was a national study. We have been working for the last 4 years to deliver an event called the Indigenous Partnerships Success Showcase, which in the UNDRIP era, the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, it's a whole new ballgame in Canada and in British Columbia. And so we've been bringing the stories of this change to our stage so that those who want to learn from them can see real examples. And we do this every June in Vancouver. Our fifth one is a year from now almost. There was a term I heard for the first time last year, pancaking. This is the effect of just stacking up new regulations on top of the old ones rather than taking a pause to remake things that you don't want. And I think this is a widespread phenomenon. People, you probably immediately recognize the significance of this, and you've seen it yourself. Interestingly, the example here is a stack of pancakes in the oil and gas sector. And this particular term, the first time I heard it was from an environmental advocate from the Pembina Institute. So this isn't, just the oil and gas industry complaining about things. It has all kinds of consequences for everyone who is part of this shared journey. And we see it all over the place. So it's one of the prevailing things that I hear in my conversations with industry and government. I'm just going to move this down so it's a little more even. We like to compare ourselves to the US, and I think often for the US, a comparison to Canada is apropos of the situation. Looking at this particular metric, the US looks like it's doing all right, but from what I've heard here, there's not a lot of happiness with the state of the business setting as pertains to permitting. You've got the same log jams, backlogs as we do, and I think there is a sense of, in Canada, in investment and industry, that we have so many roadblocks to projects moving forward. I don't think in this group there's any disagreement about it, but this is one window into it. I'm not going to dive deep into any of these. I want to skip over very quickly because I think the conversation on stage will be really the good part of this. And I promised to not be the stereotype Canadian. I'm not going to be polite. I'm sorry, but I won't apologize for anything. Except I'm sorry, I just apologized, but can't help it. Critical minerals, right now, since the infrastructure, or what is it, the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, came through, there has been, to paraphrase the great Ross Perot, there's been a giant sucking sound that we're hearing in Canada, and that's developers of clean projects that are saying, hey, the action is in the States because of that, what is it, $400 billion on the table. And so there's been, I think, a pretty quick-witted adaptation to be more competitive in Canada. There's a sense almost, I don't know, of panic in Ottawa that we could be losing important opportunities to develop our economy in all the right ways for the era we're in, and we have to get our house in order to allow those critical mineral projects to be developed quickly. Now, I think in the USA, you're hearing a giant sucking sound, and that's China taking opportunities in critical minerals around the world. And so we're both experiencing this, and I don't say this, I don't think anyone in Canada is resentful of what the U.S. is doing. The message to Ottawa that I keep hearing about is, we need to match this in our policies. That's all we have to do, so we have a competitive, as they say, a level playing field. That's all we want in industry. Hear that over and over again. Just an interesting thing, I think it's more pertinent to the particular geography of British Columbia. Our First Nations there have relatively few treaties in effect, and this means that there's a lot of uncertainty. It's driven by jurisprudence and increasingly practice, people working things out. And I referenced the UNDRIP law. In 2019, the BC legislature passed what I believe is the world's first UNDRIP law, Bill 41, which set down that UNDRIP principles are to be implemented into our legislative framework. Not overnight, it'll take probably decades. And the first industry through this was going to be forestry, and I think it has happened. And so one thing that's happening here in permitting terms is a shift of who's doing the work of permitting to local First Nations. So it's a really interesting time right now as you see, I think there's some capacity gaps in First Nations, especially small ones, having the administrative tools to be able to engage in the things they're being asked to do, but we're also seeing that in oil and gas. In BC's case, of course, is mostly gas and the upstream. We've had developments in jurisprudence there that I think caused industry to take a deep breath and say, are we going to be standing after this? But you know what? Working things out. There's one little piece of innovation that I think is coming out of BC. I don't see it, when I Google, I don't see this term being used in a lot of other places. Intentions paper, So the government is saying, okay, we're going to go through some reforms here, but before we do that, we're going to do that grander piece to set the stage for it. We're going to set out the intentions that we think we as a government and those stakeholders and rights holders we're consulting with are interested in hearing about. And I think that's a piece of innovation that arguably hasn't yet shown the ultimate goal, but I think maybe in the right direction. So I'll close by saying that through working creatively, through moving to higher levels to escape the conflicts that can bog us down and slow things down, we can thereby accomplish these higher level aims of getting more mines for critical minerals, getting the cleaner energy products to the world's markets who are looking for them, who are turning to high quality and democracy-based products for their own economies on wherever it may be across the oceans in the world. So those are my thoughts to close, and I'll take my seat. Thanks.
Thank you, Justin. Great. Well, we're a little short on time, and I've just been kind of looking at these questions. We're going to try to bundle them. If we're serious about a North American energy security process and coordinated integrated system, and you'd mentioned the Keystone Pipeline before, and I know when corridors cross over international boundaries in our country, we have to have a presidential permit. How do we better integrate our permitting process for our energy and utility corridors, not only between the lower 48, but also some possibility of utility energy corridors from Alberta up to Tidewater in Alaska?
So at the heart of it, even showing those charts and making it very complicated, what we're really talking about is the intersection of science and process and happening at the same time. And as Stuart and I have chatted about often, it is all project development permitting is about arriving at a decision. Canada, in their own individual way, independent of the U.S., has their own decision-making process to take stakeholder input in and arrive at a project that has these environmental costs, because there's always a trade-off between human activity and the natural environment. The question is, what is the acceptable level of incidental take for this species or these plants? Canada has the same process as we have it, notionally, just not in the way that it works. It will not be that difficult to harmonize, because the merits of what the decision making and the bureaucratic process is, and keep in mind, bureaucracy is good when it works. When there's breakdowns in communication and lack of coordination across the various decision makers at the state and over at the national level, those are the same issues we have in the US. They're very analogous. The solutions that we have on the permitting decision making side, as long as the prioritization is there that we now know we need to build, there's a very easy way for us to harmonize a cross-border permitting regime.
There's a sense in the discussions I have with so many administrators in governments that we can't give a clear, unambiguous signal to industry on this, because then that's loading the dice. So as a result of that, there's this delicacy. No one knows what's really being said. You have to do this and this, but why? There's a lot of kabuki on this, which maybe is driven by the nature of the processes we have, where anything you say can and will be held against you, thanks to Freedom of Information or Access to Documents Acts, and so it's just a minefield for those in the hot seat on this. And since we know the consequences of this congestion are so great, this is something that has to be talked about and solved, and maybe give those, whether it's the pen holders on regulatory decisions or their staffs or the elected people, give them more confidence that they can take high-level decisions needed for society and just get things done. How exactly do we do that? I think I wish I had the answer.
Okay, from George, and I think this is applicable to both countries. With all the land in the West owned by the feds, how can states, provinces effectively streamline permitting at the local level? Examples are forest health, and certainly something we've been talking about the last few days, transmission, siting, and capacity expansions. Alex?
So one of the reforms that we're seeing, where they're both Republican and Democrat members of the House, the United States Senate and the United States House, and what we're now seeing at the state and local level is the very reform to the Clean Water Act, or right-of-way through a National Wildlife Refuge or Forest Service or parkland for a transmission line is the same thing that was fought for 5 years ago for an LNG export or an ammonia transport facility. The changes that are now needed to meet 2030, 2040 zero carbon emission goals are now aligned with the same long linear projects that had to fight uphill, which federal lands and the ability to do right-of-way was the way in which to stop that, to prioritize a different energy source. We're no longer in that world now. The same issues afflicting a renewable transmission line are the same things afflicting Dakota Access Pipeline or a Mountain Valley Pipeline or a traditional oil and gas delivery local distribution system. So because the incentives and the definitions of success are now aligned, if you screw over an oil pipeline, you're screwing over a renewable transmission line, and you can't do that, right? So the reality here is we have an opportunity here like we've never had before to traverse federal land and not make it an energy source debate.
Yeah, we're seeing these the same trends in Canada. I think one of the interesting things, especially in the West, is how First Nations are becoming empowered to make decisions that are, in many cases, regulatory in nature. Still, all the rules being followed that need to be to protect the land, and able to, as Indigenous governments, approve projects. We've seen a number of cases. I had a slide there, didn't talk about it, but LNG, liquefied natural gas opportunities in British Columbia, in the case of the Squamish First Nation, but also the Haisla First Nation in the far northwest near Kitimat, are as nations saying, we want the development. We want to be part of this. In the past, these same nations have complained that small groups or individuals even who are disaffected by a process, have been exploited by environmental groups who are looking to stop a project at any cost by whatever means available, and it so happens that there has been a rich vein of that, and I think governments have eventually said, well, the First Nations are looking for these opportunities, so get involved. Now, not every opportunity is going to be accepted. Some might be refused. So in terms of the federal government and the Crown land, I mean, this is one of the big shifts of Canada right now in terms of redefining what it means for the Crown to have land, or as in the BLM here, and increasingly Indigenous territory and decisions made on those rights, which it's a positive direction for decisions, because we are seeing things happen.
Yeah, and indeed, Indigenous and First Nations economic opportunities are going to be subject of our sessions in Regina and Whistler. So, okay, excuse me. Sorry. Okay, now here's a provocative question. The same people that are wanting to go to zero carbon emissions are the ones creating the biggest roadblocks with their environmental policies that they implement. How can we fix that? Alex?
So of that IIJA money from 2021, there's a 5-year clock on that infrastructure siting money. We're already 2.5 years into that. Half of that program is undersubscribed by states. That money is going to get left on the table or reprogrammed. Very similar to the $2 trillion in IRA money for states, locals, tribes, and the tax credit side. We are now in a situation where the previous rhetorical fights, where you don't like the outcome of an election or a pipeline or a transmission line, so you use the process against the project because you lost in the political process, those days are coming to a close. Because now that projects are this transparent and both sides have shared pain for using the process against the project that you just don't like, are no longer going to be acceptable ways to obstruct a project. And I will tell you, if you look at the litigious environment of the environmental NGOs and private property landowners that are suing projects because they just don't like that they lost in the decision-making process, are losing court cases on a variance of 7 out of 10 times. You are no longer allowed we no longer live in a black box world where everything isn't transparent. If you're holding up a project that is directly causing a 10% increase on your community's electricity prices because you don't like that it's cutting through your backyard, you're going to be held accountable for that. And so I know it's going to be an interesting transition, and again, we like to see ghosts on both sides. Like the renewable guys don't like the oil and gas guys. Both sides, the emperor's not wearing clothes anymore. The reality is that the solutions for one are going to help the other, and those that stand in the way are going to get embarrassed.
Great. Do you want to take that question?
No, I thoroughly agree. I nothing to add there.
Okay. Okay, this is directed to you, Alex. What is the single most important action that a state legislator, there are many here, can do to impact permit reform?
Whenever I see delays, the feds point at the states point at the feds, and then the feds point at their other agency. It wasn't me, it was the Fish and Wildlife Service. They had jurisdiction over steelhead trout. No, it was National Marine Fisheries. They had jurisdiction over salmon. It's an ocean-bearing fish. Everyone likes to cast blame. Same thing happens at the state level. And so one of the more important things that I've seen in states is state legislatures, when the budget comes up, is they assign a full-time FTE that can serve as the counterparty that actually works with the tribes and the affected local community so that they can actually serve as almost like an advisor and a counterparty to move through the system, because that's where we see some of the biggest holdups is a lack of effective stakeholder input at the beginning. Because I will tell you this, community engagement is not something to be taken lightly. Projects are 0 for 50 if they don't follow the rules. The administrative record is weak. Spending money on the front end to do things that you previously didn't think you had to do are no longer the best way to build a project. An extra $2 million here to have a robust engagement and public comment period on the front end means you're not going to get sued 4 years from now. So the most important thing a state can do is state permitting council, so they can have a transparent, depoliticized process for moving projects across all sectors that traverse multiple election cycles so that a politician doesn't have to put their finger on the scale on one project or one sector over another. And we saw this most recently with Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan with the Enbridge project coming over from Canada, Line 5. That project is going to get approved, not because Gretchen Whitmer, as a Democrat, had to approve an oil and gas pipeline. That's really it's essential. But at the same time, it was on the dashboard. There was an infrastructure czar coordinator. It was a designated position. It wasn't me. It was the dashboard, right? It was the state permitting council. Divorcing politicians from having to make decisions about projects is essential. The more that we can do that, it's going to make the legislators in this room, their lives much easier, and it is going to make projects less susceptible to the whims of gubernatorial election shifts. And so I think that's probably one of the most, and that's very achievable. That's not a political issue. That's a true process redesign.
Great. Stuart, Canada and U.S. share many waters, and often they send different signals to the marketplace. What can be done to harmonize that approach and be competitive together?
Yeah, well, I'm thinking this question points me to the transboundary issue of Alaska and British Columbia, which is a mining issue. I think it's misdefined. I don't think it's an environmental issue. Obviously, it has environmental considerations galore, but I think it's an innovation and an indigenous opportunity story that is not being seen. Instead, it has been defined rigorously by interest groups in Washington especially, but also locally in Alaska as this issue. It's affecting decisions. It's keeping important mines and critical minerals out of the market. This should be a shining example of Canada-USA cooperation on an important economic opportunity that can be done soundly, but instead, all we hear is that it's just this impossible environmental hazard, and I think that's wrong. In terms of the ocean side, I would, living in Victoria as I do, that means I look out upon the Strait of Juan de Fuca. I know when the whales are around now. This wasn't the case until a few years ago. I know the killer whales pod, J-pod, is feeding in my area because the ships are moving slower, thanks to the, I think it's the ECHO program, right, Robert? From the Port of Vancouver and the ports got together, so it's a voluntary ship slowdown. Didn't need to be mandated. I think it's just a great example of industry saying, yeah, that makes sense. Let's have less engine noise so those animals can enjoy their feed, and it's probably an economic cost to that. And I think this might be picked up in some places on the other side of the parallel, right? So why not have more of that? You know, I think it's, rather than the legislation, you know, I felt Bill C-48, I don't know if Senator McDonald is in the room still, but Bill C-48 with kind of a ban on a certain class really aimed at Alberta was very corrosive to national unity in Canada, to just ban certain kinds of tankers from the West Coast. When you can have a chance for First Nations to be part of protection programs, to take it in, again, a more positive, constructive sense, a win-win, rather than these divisive solutions. So in terms of that as a cross-border issue, I think it's really just how we can be more effective on things that are in the natural collaboration space.
I'll just make a comment. When I was working for Congressman John Miller during the Exxon Valdez disaster in 1989, we visited the Exxon Valdez, and that resulted in a bipartisan Oil Pollution Prevention Act of 1990, which resulted in double-hulled tankers and tug escorts, both up in Prince William Sound and at the beginning of the Strait of Juan de Fuca. Now we understand that there will be 3 rescue tugs stationed near Victoria as part of the Trans Mountain permit process. So,
yeah, salvage tugs, rescue tugs, and a whole host of other programs to ensure the safety of these vessels as they go by. And I think when I go down to the park, there's people walking their dog, and I know there's a ship. I've got the app. I know what those ships are. Oh, there's a tanker there. I know there's a tug behind it. Maybe there's a tug in front of it. And I know there's a couple of pilots on board. And no one in the park is standing there worried about it. They're just enjoying the sunshine, and that's how it should be.
well, and Fred Felleman, the Port of Seattle Commissioner, was here yesterday and talking about the need to take one of those 3 tugs and put it over in Sydney area because of the sensitivity of Harrow Strait and Turn Point. You've got to make a bunch of turns to get out, so that might be a further discussion. Alex, back to you. Has the new Department of Defense program for assisting with permitting been helpful in highlighting these issues?
Well, I mean, it's talking about using the Defense Production Act to recognize that critical minerals are, much like border security and others, are a national and primary sector that more so than maybe transit or roads and bridges. It is helpful to an extent on the funding side, but the reality is the same obstacles that a new critical minerals mine might face, even if it's exempted from big federal National Environmental Policy Act, still has to go get 7 or 8 federal permits and 5 other local. So you're pushing the obstacles aren't going away. The thing that I think is important is it's allowing for prioritization of resources to go to technology. And for those that are in the states, and for one of the questions about what states can do, some states across the country are taking not a significant amount of money, $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, and putting out an RFP for many of the people in this room, which are consultants and management information system folks that are actually helping shore up the laborious work of getting your Department of Environmental Quality and your lands office and your Fish and Wildlife office. It's just difficult for them to even get on a Microsoft Teams Zoom call to figure out what their roles and responsibilities are. There's a way we can harness technology in the states to not only reduce the requirement on the FTEs needed to make decisions, but to work smarter, not harder, to make sure that almost like Slack, or I don't know, one of the things that kids use we can use technology to arrive at where the decisions need to be made much faster. That's what's happening with the DOT program on critical minerals. It's not taking us 3 years to get to some initial due diligence on whether or not the mine will be economically viable. We get to that decision faster.
Good. We have 1 minute, so gentlemen, wrap up comments.
You go first, too.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the last question here because that kind of ties it up nicely. What are best practices if anyone is leaving here saying, okay, how am I going to be more effective as a result of what I've heard here? I think having that higher level, elevating from the conflict zone into the solution space is always the way to go for any problem solving, I think. But at risk of that being a nebulous statement, how does one do that? I think stating the intention you have to your publics so that there is, I think, a general move in the discourse away from just conflict talk into solution talk.
It is no longer coal versus natural gas versus wind and solar and hydro. We need all of them, and all of them are taking more than 10 years from concept to completion. The changes that you can engage in a robust and open conversation to fix now in the States is going to help everybody, because there's no way to pick one energy source over another by using the process to hold them up. The action is now, the beginning of legislative sessions, the beginning of next year. There's a tremendous opportunity to make real change. And do you know who benefits? All of us. And this doesn't need to be a complicated tax policy, healthcare, how do we unwind it? There are real achievable things, and there is no silver bullet. So let's hit a bunch of singles, to use a baseball reference. We don't need to worry about this big global bill happening. Incrementally, the cumulative impact of doing all these small things and speeding up the process are going to make America and our relationship with Canada a much stronger place, because we can build stuff. Much faster. The rest of the world builds in 2 years, and it takes us 10, and we have the cleanest and most respected environmental process in the world.
So remarkable, and I hope you find it educational session. Let's give our panel a big hand.
All right, thank you very much to our panel. I want to also recognize our lunch sponsor, or I guess co-host, and that's the Greater Northwest Passenger Rail Summit, and that'll be going on today and tomorrow. It's a great opportunity to partner with this group, and I hope you all, or if you're interested, can stay and take part in those meetings tomorrow. Before we transition to our gavel exchange between our outgoing and incoming president, I want to take this opportunity to recognize our Penware staff. And really, we have an incredibly loyal, dedicated, and long-serving staff. I tallied up the other day, collectively, the number of years of service that they have with Penware, and it's over 100 years. And that doesn't include Matt's 90 years of service. So anyway, I'd like to have Penware staff stand. So Steve Myers, Betts Meyer, Nate Weigel, Tara Edens, Bridget Burwell, Stephanie Dinka, Bruce Agnew, stand up, Eric Koldeman, and Sumi Shah isn't here. And then finally, most importantly, around the summit, Rachel Kopp, Rachel spends a lot of time planning the summit, and she's already started planning the 2025 summit, if you can believe that, in Washington State. So we're looking, she's planning Whistler and then also looking 2 years in advance. So join me in thanking them and appreciating their service to Penware. Okay, I'd like to invite our outgoing president, Senator Winder, to come up, and then our incoming president, MLA Rick Glumack.
Thanks, Brandon. This is my last official act as the president of Penware. In a way, it's a sad occasion. In another way, it's just the continuation of tradition and trust that goes on between the elected officials that serve in these positions. So I know as the outgoing president that Rick's going to do a great job. He's going to continue the work of collaboration between the provinces, the territories, and the 5 U.S. states, because that's what we're all about. And I'm hopeful that there's been enough energy put into food security and sustainability, energy security and sustainability, and critical minerals security and sustainability, that continues to ripple through Penware, because as you've heard, all of it ties together. If you don't have energy, you don't have food. If you don't have food, you don't live. If you don't have the products to make our culture and economy work, we're in trouble. So that's the effort I think Penware brings, a lot of different political ideas, but people willing to set aside those and work for the common good of the people of the U.S. and of Canada in our region. Quick bio on Rick. He was elected as a member of the Legislative Assembly for the province of British Columbia in 2017, re-elected in 2020. He serves the communities he represents proudly. He's been appointed by the Premier of BC as the liaison to Penware. And in his role, Rick is tasked with ensuring that the BC government remains engaged on important cross-border issues like the Cascadia Innovation Corridor, the prospect of high-speed rail between the 2 jurisdictions. Rick has served as BC lead delegate to Penware since 2017, and I've personally really enjoyed working with Rick, watching him grow, watching him pick up the concept of what Penware's about, of cooperation across our provinces and territories and the states and between our 2 countries. And I know that it's going to be in good hands. And I welcome you as the new president, congratulate you. And as part of our tradition, we pass on it's really a very beautiful box engraved with Rick's name as the MLA. And it's a beautiful box with a gavel and a receiver in it. So congratulations, and keep up the great work. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Senator. I didn't know there would actually be a gavel. That's amazing. Thank you so much for your leadership in this last year and all the issues that you've brought forward that are so important across our region, and for all the work that you've done in putting this summit together. Before I get into my comments, I'd like to first share a video from the Premier of British Columbia. And I invite my BC team to come on up on stage, all the BC MLAs, and I'll introduce you after the video.
Hi, it's Premier David Eby here. I wish I could join you in beautiful Boise. Lucky for us, BC is well represented at your 32nd annual summit. It's great to see Rick Glumack stepping into the role of president of the Pacific Northwest Economic Region. He served his constituents well as the MLA for Port Moody Coquitlam. He served our government well as the Premier's liaison to the Pacific Northwest. And I know he'll do the same as your president, looking out for communities on both sides of the border. This is vital. We share more than just a border, of course. We share personal and family ties that go back generations. We share a culture of innovation and entrepreneurship. And we share a deep connection with the unique beauty of this corner of the planet. We also share unique advantages here, from abundant natural resources and clean energy to strong economic bonds. As British Columbians, the relationships we have with our American friends and neighbors in the Pacific Northwest are very strong. Our cross-border partnerships need to be just as strong. I'm confident that by working together, the Pacific Northwest region will grow stronger, more competitive, and more innovative. I look forward to continuing our good work together. And I look forward to welcoming you to Whistler in beautiful British Columbia next year. Thanks, and have a great summit.
So thank you so much to our Premier for those kind words. Yeah, my name is Rick Lumack, and I'm a member of the Legislative Assembly for Port Moody Coquitlam and the Premier's liaison to the Pacific Northwest, and as of now, President of Penwar. And I'd like to first acknowledge the hospitality that we've received here in this beautiful city of Boise, and acknowledge also that we're gathered on the traditional territory of the Shoshone Bannock and the Shoshone Paiute tribes. And I'd like to introduce you to some of our BC team standing here on stage today. My colleagues have and will continue to play a pivotal role in our work as part of BC's commitment to Penwar and its mandate. So joining me on the stage today is Rolly Russell, Parliamentary Secretary for Rural and Regional Development, Brittany Anderson, Premier's Special Advisor on Youth and the Parliamentary Secretary for Tourism, and Dan Ashton, MLA for Penticton. So thank you, guys. To commemorate this moment, we'll take a quick selfie. Everyone.
Okay.
Excellent.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm very honored to be here today and excited to take on this role as president for Penwar and to continue the great work that's been happening since Penwar was established in 1991. I'd like to extend my sincere gratitude to Senator Chuck Winder and his team, again, for the great issues that you brought forward and the great work in putting this conference, this summit together this week. I'd like to also acknowledge acknowledge the great work and collaborative efforts of so many people here today, so many delegates. Congratulations on a successful year. During the summit, we heard about a range of issues where progress still needs to happen, but some progress is being made, and that's why we're here, to identify solutions to some of our common challenges across the region. As a binational, nonpartisan group of leaders in this region, we can make a difference today and into the future. And my goal as president in the coming year is to strengthen Penwar's successful collaborative efforts by putting more resources on the Canadian side so that we can work more effectively across the border on our shared and common issues. We're a large region, and we have many differences, but I see these differences as strengths. When we have a commitment to our common interests and an understanding of how we can leverage our strengths, we can achieve great things. Collaboration is what drives prosperity in our region. We're not islands, we're connected. And Penwar is a place where we can connect. Penwar brings together legislators and business leaders, private sector and public sector, to support each other and channel those strengths. By working together, our region is stronger, enhancing competitiveness, supporting job growth, unlocking opportunities. So wherever we come from, north, south, east, not too far east, west, the way forward is together. And while we build and grow our economy, we also have to acknowledge that we are in the midst of a changing climate. And these changes present many challenges. But when we plan for the future, we can address these challenges, not only address the challenges, but find opportunities. Nowhere is better positioned than the Pacific Northwest to lead the way in innovation, from energy to clean tech to transportation. Together, we can rise to meet this moment. Together, we can build a cleaner economy for everyone. So, I invite you all to join me on this journey as we continue to push forward for the advancement of our region. I'm honored as the Premier's liaison to the Pacific Northwest and as your new president to be hosting next year's annual summit in the beautiful municipality of Whistler, British Columbia. That'll be the 33rd year that we've worked together to strengthen this phenomenal region of our world. So, in closing, I would like to thank again the Penware staff for all the amazing work that you did throughout the year and leading up to this summit. I look forward to working with you, with all of you, in the coming year. And if you notice on your tables, there's some gifts there from Tourism BC. You're welcome to take those. And we're going to show a video to get you excited about coming to British Columbia next year and to Whistler. So thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you in Whistler in July 2024. Thank you.
Okay, who's going to Whistler? Raise your hand. All right. In addition to electing a new president, we also elected 2 new vice presidents to our Penware board. And I just want to recognize Representative Delana Johnson from Alaska. And then Sandy Silver, the former premier of Yukon, Minister Sandy Silver, is also our vice president. I don't know if Sandy's still here, but. And then they join Representative Cindy Ryu from Washington State and MLA Ken Francis from Saskatchewan. So welcome to the club. All right, a couple announcements. Policy tours are departing this afternoon on a kind of a rolling timeline between 2 and 2:30. So we'll meet out here in the lobby and we'll direct you to where the buses are. So be ready, don't be late. So between 2 and 2:30. The Executive Committee and Delegate Council strategy meeting will be held in room 120AB. So don't go on a tour if you're on the Executive Committee or the Delegate Council. The Feral Swine Technical Assistance session is in room 130. And then reception tonight at 6 p.m. at the Boise train depot. And we'll be taking buses to that reception. And they'll depart outside of the Boise Center on Front Street. So be ready around 6 p.m. or just before, and we'll shuttle some buses. And then finally, the hospitality suite will be at 8 o'clock, 8 to 10. John Brendan might sing for us tonight again, and it'd be great to have everyone there tonight to close out the summit. So with that, right. Okay, the U.S. DOT program's office hours for technical assistance will be between 2 and 5, room 100D. So if you have questions on applications for federal funding and loan programs and any technical questions, they're there to help you. So mark that on your schedule. So with that, I think we'll end lunch and we'll look forward to seeing you all tonight at the reception. So thank you.